Great, welcome back everybody. Thank you for coming back in time, because I think this next session, as with the rest of the sessions, is going to be really important one. I'm sure many people will have seen snippets or different extracts of the campaigns that we're going to be talking about today. So to be able to see them in full glory with the insider knowledge is really exciting, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about them myself. So we're going to go, I think, from north to south, which is the correct order of importance, I believe, in which case we're going to start by welcoming Adrian, who's going to be talking about the Police Scotland campaign.
Ever called a girl dull?
Or whistled at her walking down the street?
Ever stared at a woman on a bus, or
said to your mate, I'd do that,
You ever give a girl a compliment? Like, nice?
and wondered why you didn't get a thank you?
ever slid into a girl's DMs?
You went ahead and just showed her it.
You ever bought a lassie dinner and felt that meant she owed you something?
You ever got her 3 shots in a row hoping you'd get a shot of her?
Then what? Bundled her wasted into a taxi and took her back to yours?
You ever guilt tripped her? Or pressured her?
Or pushed her into it?
And then left feeling like a lad?
Most men don't look in the mirror and see a problem.
But it's staring us right in the face.
Sexual violence starts long before you think it does. Don't be that guy.
Right, hello everybody, I'm Adrian Sell from Police Scotland. I've got 7 minutes. Can somebody time me on their phone? I left my phone on the table, and give me a wave at 1 minute to go. Is that okay? Brilliant, thank you. There's a lot to talk about, and I could talk about this for probably about 5 hours, so very quickly, our campaign, that guy had 6 million plus, probably closer to 7 million views of that film worldwide. 33,000 uses of the hashtag Don't Be That Guy, 28,000 retweets, 80,000 unique visitors to the website. It's probably much, much higher than that, but Google Analytics doesn't work, especially when you're talking about crime, because people don't click on allow cookies. 160,000 pages of content views, again, probably much higher than that, and massive worldwide media coverage. Changes to violence against women and girls strategies UK-wide, I think the agenda is shifting, not just because of our work, because of work by lots and lots of different people, but things are changing. Ultimately, from our point of view, and I think we reached very much the same conclusions that Fiona did, in terms of as she brilliantly put over in her presentation earlier. From our world, our rape campaigns, in terms of trying to stop serious sexual violence against women and girls, was all based around consent. It was all about educating young men about consent and the importance of consent. However, to my mind, having worked on 3 or 4 rape campaigns since I joined Police Scotland, it wasn't working, it wasn't resonating. I couldn't quite work out why. The reality is that most men, and I'll go to my sources in a minute, most men understand consent, but some choose to ignore it. That's the fundamental reality. But the problem isn't consent. Consent is still a really important part of the education of men, but the reality is it's not the silver bullet. Lots of men totally understand consent. Most men don't set out to offend. Now, there are men, absolutely, who do set out to offend. There's a spectrum of behaviour. At one end, there's men who will never be a threat to women, and at the other end, there's men who will always be a threat to women, and there's the men in the middle who might be, depending on circumstance. But those men who do offend, a lot of them don't wake up in the morning, look in the mirror and say, I am going to go out and sexually assault a woman. Some men do, but a lot of men don't, but something goes wrong. We, as a communications team within Police Scotland, the National Police Service in Scotland, we follow the Government Communications Service behaviour change methodology of doing comms, and part of that is the OASIS model. Very simple, dead straightforward. The key bit for me, and the bit that I started working on when I first joined and really introduced to the organisation, was the audience insight bit. And that's about doing your research, doing your homework, and understanding who your audience is. And there's lots and lots of benefits of that, which I don't have time to go into, but if you're interested, give me a shout and I'll talk to you about it. A lot of the time it's about saying no to our lovely colleagues in operational policing who come to us with ideas and say, can we do this? And we go away, we find out about it and say, no, that's not going to work. It'll be a waste of money. The problem is male sexual entitlement. Fundamentally, sexual violence exists because of male sexual entitlement. And a phrase that a campaigner and activist who works in this area that we've been working with uses is in the air that we breathe. Everything within our Western society is reinforcing male sexual entitlement again and again and again. And although I would regard myself as being, liberal, middle-class male, white, highly privileged, the thinking all the right thoughts, at the same time, since joining policing 5 years ago, the scales have fallen from my eyes even further at the level of male sexual entitlement that's baked into our society and is being reinforced again and again and again to our young men in terms of the accepted modes of behaviour. And everything in Fiona's talk previously, we went out, did research with women, and absolutely one of the first things that she said, totally agree with, that women just want men to go, stop talking to them, stop talking to us. The key bits of research, and we did a lot of academic research over 3-4 years of looking at this, really doing a deep dive. But the key bits that really stick out that I wanted to share with you is Duke's from 2012, which is an amazing piece of work. Now, I'm very conscious that I'm not an academic and I'm potentially in a room with a lot of academics, but for me, this was a really important one. Looked at literature review, over 3,000 abstracts of the causes of sexual violence, boiled it down to just under 300 kind of really robust bits of research. And the big thing was, the research was rated 3 stars, 2 stars, 1 star. And the big thing was that gender inequitable masculinities is absolutely at the heart of sexual violence. And sexual entitlement is absolutely part of that, along with lots of other stuff, and you'll be able to read that. A really, really important piece of research from my point of view. And again, if anybody's got any views on that, speak to me after. I'll be really interested to hear, because I ain't an academic. Other ones, Sharon Lynn Vetter's work. We tend to, because messaging around victims tends to be owned by third sector organisations and the Scottish Government in Scotland, we've been increasingly moving into perpetrator messaging, and it's a safe space for us to occupy because nobody else is really doing it. We kind of have forged a path with online sexual grooming in that area and been successful, and it's an area that we're comfortable that is relevant for us as a criminal justice organisation. Vetter's work just says that you take a perpetrator, cut them down the middle, and they'll have male sexual entitlement running through them like a stick of rock. Another really important piece of research just from last year, small sample, and a little bit of confirmation bias from my point of view, but was telling me what I thought, that young men basically understand consent. Most of them understand consent, they choose to ignore it. Separately, ultimately, to reduce sexual offending, we have to challenge entitlement. That's Flood 21. And again, I can give you these references if you want, just saying the same thing. As part of the work with the agency that we worked with to produce that 60-second film, as part of their kind of response to our brief, they just in passing used this phrase: sexual entitlement is assuming consent where none is given. And that really struck me as a brilliant articulation of the problem that we're dealing with. That male thinking is so embedded that men, and hands up, I have done this in my youth, undoubtedly, that I have assumed consent to a woman's attention, where none is given. And this is what we have to change in order to change the more serious sexual violence further upstream. So our big challenge, was building the proposition. Women have been saying that it's a continuum of behaviour from the seemingly minor to the more serious for years. Activists have been saying men need to participate, and ultimately men will be the ones who can change men's behaviour, and behaviour change requires societal change. So the thing that I'll end on is that our proposition, that was where the really hard work occurred, was trying to get the proposition right. Ultimately, overt male sexual entitlement puts men at greater risk of serious sexual offending, and that's how we could relate it to policing. Our proposition had to be convincing, and why the message was being delivered by policing. If you're displaying overt male sexual entitlement, you are at a higher risk of committing serious sexual violence, and I can prove that through the academic work that we had read. The response to that on social media is #NotAllMen. And yes, it is not all men. However, the equally important thing is that if you're displaying overt male sexual entitlement, you're contributing to a culture that is all pervasive, but you are basically part of the problem. You're not part of the solution. And you're potentially giving permission to the men who will go on to offend. And this is the thing why it's not, it's exactly the same as it's not enough to be not racist. You have to be anti-racist. In the same way, it's not enough for men to be not, kind of sexually offending. You have to be anti-sexual sexual offending. You have to keep your friends from sexually offending as well. And that's where we're taking the campaign next. We're working on the next iteration, and our messaging will be about basically how men can have those difficult conversations with a friend who is displaying overt male sexual entitlement. And ultimately, it's about stopping women feeling unsafe every day. And that is, I will click through the rest of those, jump back.
Thank you, Adrian. And if people want to keep their questions, because there'll be plenty of time at the end to have a discussion and ask questions as well. Next, I'd like to welcome up Sarah.
Hi, everyone. I'm quite traditional with my written notes here, so I hope that's okay. Right. So I'm Sarah Keaveney. I work at Greater Manchester Combined Authority in the communications team, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we made our Is This Okay video. And first, here's the video.
Look at her.
Very nice.
Yeah, she's all right.
Yeah, no
worries. See you soon. Bye.
Watch it. Hey, beautiful. Gives a smile. They almost pretty when you smile. Hey, don't ignore me. Come on, love. Think you're better than me, yeah? You're not even that fit. So what, you're not going to invite me now?
Yeah, you're asking for it dressed like that.
Are we off tonight? She definitely wants it.
Oh, it's sexy.
Do you think this is okay?
Okay, today our film has been viewed over 5.2 million times on Twitter alone and over 140,000 times across other channels. There have been over 42,000 mentions of the hashtag, and 50% of these mentions came in the first 24 hours after our launch. Of those who shared the video, 44% were male and 56% were female. The film was also shared by celebrities and influencers, engaged regional, national and international coverage, and this is how we did it. So, our brief. Last year, Greater Manchester launched its first gender-based violence strategy, which sets out how we will enhance the safety of women and girls while preventing gender-based violence from occurring in the first place and challenging the attitudes and inequalities that enable it. This followed a public consultation that was launched in the days that followed the murder of Sarah Everard in March, and the strategy had been many months in the making. But following Sarah's murder, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, wanted action to be taken immediately, and plans for the consultation were brought forward. The Mayor was clear that Sarah's murder and the other horrific murders of women by men that followed had to be a watershed moment and lead to real change. And he was also clear this change had to come from men and boys, not women and girls, as we've discussed earlier. He committed as part of our strategy to launching a major campaign that challenged men and boys to make this change. Following the launch of our strategy in the autumn, we set about considering what this campaign could look like. At the time, there weren't any major behaviour change campaigns of this scale in the UK, apart from Don't Be That Guy, which launched just as we were thinking about ours and really put the pressure on us. Major behaviour change campaigns like this take years, as Adrian talked about. They require big budgets and long lead times, and we didn't have any of those things. The Mayor wanted this campaign to launch within weeks, really. It was also a tricky topic. As we discussed, gender-based violence is a complex scale of abuse, so where do we even start? So we started where any good campaign should, and with the insight. Due to really tight timescales, we couldn't get a lot of our own original insight, so we looked at existing research and insight to help shape our thinking. One of the things we looked at was a UN Women UK survey, which found that 71% of women of all ages have experienced some form of sexual harassment in a public space, and this figure rises to 86% amongst 18 to 24-year-olds. These are the statistics at the end of the video. A Government Equalities Office sexual harassment survey had found that 42% of sexual harassment took place on the street or while walking around in public, 31% in a club, pub or bar, and 28% on public transport. After commissioning EY3 Media, an agency, to work with us on producing the video, they also ran their own Snap survey to boost this insight. And this told us that more than 80% of women had experienced catcalling, 75% had experienced comments such as "you should smile more," and the same number had experienced groping in public, and 72% had experienced wolf whistling. This led us to the idea of focusing on harassment in public spaces, and we believe that highlighting these types of behaviours would resonate with a wide audience, both the women and girls experience it and the men and boys who are perpetuating it, perhaps not realising the damage that they're causing. Once we settled on the idea and commissioned the agency, we had just 4 weeks to create and launch the video, which was a real challenge. The insight gathered formed the basis of the content, Concepts were scripted and storyboarded, and a cast was selected. And at every stage, the ideas were tested to ensure that they would land well with the audience. We held discussions with a number of groups, including a charity working with domestic abuse perpetrators, which told us that men didn't want to feel as though they were being told off or accused. They wanted to feel engaged and left to challenge themselves. This was crucial to the tone of the campaign, as we didn't want the woman at the end of the video to appear as if she was angry, because the insight told us this would actually have the opposite effect. While the video was aimed at men and boys, we obviously needed to make sure that we tackled the issue sensitively. So we worked with women's groups throughout development, including some great women's groups in Manchester, who we're still working with now. And again, this was crucial to the outcome. The women's groups told us they didn't want the woman to appear vulnerable and sort of distressed. So we had to make sure we delivered a sort of a neutral tone. And as such, we recorded dozens of different versions of the ending where she delivers that line to make sure that she came across sort of resigned, if you like, to the fact that this is just the way it is, rather than any sort of explicit emotion. So that the idea of the video was to show a series of everyday scenarios and build to the more hostile situation towards the end, using sounds such as the car horns and the wolf whistles to just build that crescendo to a point where she's just completely overwhelmed at the end. Engagement with the different groups also led to changes along the way. For example, the women's groups were keen to highlight online harassment, such as having photos shared without consent and inappropriate comments on social media, and this became a key scene at the beginning of the film, as you've seen. When we had a final draft of the video, we gathered a new group of more than 30 men and boys ranging in age from 16 to 50, who saw the video without any prior involvement and provided feedback to ensure it would land in the way we'd intended. These were some of the comments that we got from these groups. Feedback included that it made them feel angry and saddened that women were experiencing this so often. All the men and boys we asked said the behaviour was not okay, yet they recognise this happening to women every day. The video was launched on the 16th of December, 4 weeks after we began work on it, following the first meeting of our gender-based violence board in Greater Manchester. It was supported with PR activity, including a virtual press conference led by the Mayor and Deputy Mayors, a new webpage, organic social media messaging, and importantly included signposting to support services. As mentioned earlier, the results were really exciting. Following the initial spike of activity after the launch, we had a second spike in January, on January the 13th, which coincided with the murder of Aisling Murphy, without us actually pushing that, and that showed that the video was still generating organic content a month on and being used in debate around change. Quickly, this is just a word cloud that shows some of the language being used in the online conversations around this. One of the key themes that came through our evaluation was a call for the video to be shown in schools and colleges, and that's something that we've started to do. So really quickly, the next steps are we're now tendering for an agency to deliver the next phase of this, which will be a much bigger campaign, and we'll look at the many different and complex forms of gender-based violence, as discussed earlier, in terms of sort of racial harassment and violence and the many different intricacies of that. That will involve extensive engagement with many different groups that we've been involved in, and a major education programme in schools. And that's everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben, and really good to hear that actually that all of the campaigns are already making plans for a stage 2, for a follow-up campaign. Now we've got plenty of time then for discussion. So again, we'll just ask if you can make sure that you use the mics so that it can be picked up on Zoom as well, please. And your question can either be to one person or we can put it across the panel. And I think Bianca is first.
Hi, thanks everyone for your presentations. They were all really fascinating and great to see Some really, I think exciting prevention work going on in the UK. So I had a question for everyone actually, which was around whether any of these campaigns have been evaluated in terms of the impact that they've had on particularly men's knowledge and behaviour. And I'm asking this with, in recognition of the fact that no one campaign obviously is going to solve the problem, and that this is very, very long-term work, but nonetheless, do you have any insights into the kind of real-life impacts that the campaigns have had? Thanks.
Okay, I'll go first. As I sort of said in my presentation, what we saw from our evaluation was the amount of men who were sharing it, and the what's the word? The sentiment that was sort of about 96% positive or neutral. So that was really interesting for us, because we could see it was being shared by the men and the boys, because I think in those early days there were some comments back from my colleagues, oh, it's great, it's being shared really widely, but it's all women and girls. So that proved that it wasn't. Some of the bigger sort of influencers and celebrities were male. And following the murder of Aisling Murphy, an Irish national footballer who was fairly well known launched his own campaign and cited ours as his reason for doing that. So we could see it was having some impact in that respect. Whether it's having an impact on that behaviour change, it is such a long-term piece of work that we wouldn't expect to see any of that. And we're now working on how we do get the base data now for the next bit of the campaign, and then we can really track that over the years. But it's going to be a really long-term piece of work.
Who was your biggest male influencer? Who was it that tweeted it when you went, yes?
Oh gosh. I'm not sure, to be honest. There was just one, but it's really quite embarrassing, because it's sort of a relation of mine, which was by pure coincidence, a BBC radio DJ called Sean Keaveney. He has quite a lot of following on social media. Lots of politicians, some TV presenters. Quite a few. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Excellent. Do you want to go next?
Good afternoon. Now follow the safety announcement. We will be conducting a fire alarm system test in the next 2 minutes.
Thought we had an extra guest then.
This is normal, and this is a test setting. We do not require any participation or action to be taken. I repeat, this is a test setting. Please do not take action. We apologise for any inconvenience this may cause, and thank you for your cooperation.
Well, that's my answer. So I did that without moving my lips. I think it's a great question, and I think my answers would be very, very similar to Sarah's in terms of, I think in terms of our evaluation, we've done a full evaluation, and the main thing is really combination of reach and that initial reaction. I would say that 70% of our social media response was from women, which, with that kind of collective scream of this is what we've been talking about all our lives, which was really gratifying and kind of really made us feel like we were on the right track. And I guess something that police talk about quite a lot is public confidence, and it's ultimately that public confidence that police are trying to do something about it. Is I guess where we're at. We're no further forward than that. At the same time, a lot of men did respond, and in terms of, you were talking about 25 years, the phrase that I've been using.
Well, you win the prize, which is 50% off Fiona's book. So congratulations to you.
Absolutely, and I will be buying Fiona's book. I can't even remember what I was talking about now. In terms of I think I've been saying 30 years to colleagues. So I think the big thing is we need that focus. The structure of our campaign, the way it's always been in my head, is that effectively we're asking men to do two things. One is self-reflection and the other is peer intervention. And that first ad was very much about self-reflection, looking at one's own behaviour and saying, right, okay, is there any points where not necessarily done anything illegal, but have done stuff that make women feel unsafe? The next stage is how do you have those conversations with your peers, and the stuff that Ben was talking about in terms of the models of behaviour change and trying to scale this up. And there's a lot of really interesting work being done by people like Jackson Katz, who's a big American, TED Talk kind of activist in this area. A guy that we work with is called Graham Golden, who's ex-Violence Reduction Unit in Glasgow, and is taking the thinking that worked in Glasgow in terms of reducing knife crime by 50% over 10 years, taking that thinking into the violence against women and girls, or men's violence, as I like to call it, space, and the trying to influence behaviour that way. So what Sarah said.
Thanks. We'll come back for another question. Yep, over here.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Zoe, and I'm a research assistant over at Northumbria Uni. My question is sort of a question/observation, mainly for Adrian, but obviously you're all welcome to give your thoughts. But I found it really interesting, the fact that obviously there's evidence that shows it, and you sort of got the impression that it isn't an issue of consent in terms of men know what consent means, but are just not sort of just checking that it's there kind of thing. But that doesn't translate to the courtroom, where consent for victims of sexual violence is the main reason most of the time where it's not getting through, because it's can they prove or sort of disprove, I guess, whether consent was there, and that is a main issue. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that. I'm not really sure what the question is, but I just found it interesting, but also a bit frustrating, which I think other people will, that it's not actually an issue. Men know that they need to get consent, but in the courtroom, it's all about whether they can prove consent is there.
I totally agree, and I think there's still quite a big gap between what's going on in that stage of the criminal justice process and our bit in Police Scotland. From my point of view, I mean, it's obviously it's a highly political area in terms of how we prosecute sexual crime, and how we and there are some really practical suggestions that I know that lots and lots of politicians are looking at. And I think, again, similar to the stuff that Fiona was saying earlier on, ultimately it's down to us as voters to try and put pressure on our politicians to instigate that change. I have personal experience. A friend of mine was involved in a very, very high profile sexual violence case in Scotland involving a politician. I'm sure you can work out who it was. And that individual was found not guilty, although he admitted to it in court. And these are the really, really difficult things. So I think it has to be like an orchestra, where we're working across every conceivable area in education, young children through to teens and young adults, policing and educating within the workplace, as well as how we police through to the media, and something that I was talking about with some folk earlier on is I'm a great believer in, I think that if we explain to some men, what's going on and help them understand why they're behaving in the ways that they're behaving, that they will get it and they will modify their behavior. And I think there's a lot to be said for, I would look to CBT and person-centered therapy techniques which work, and they will, I think, kind of lift the lid on male behavior in some men, it's going to be much harder to change that behaviour. But I think for others, they may be, it's just not discussed. Men generally don't get to have an interior life in our culture, and they're told constantly how to behave, what real men do, whether that's advertising, whether that's films. I went to see Top Gun last night. What a waste of 18 quid.
Ooh, controversial.
Yeah, shockingly bad. And pornography, and pornography is a massive problem. It's not to say all pornography is wrong. Controversial statement too. But that is the biggest miseducator of young people at the moment, and unless we really start to have proper grown-up conversations about access to pornography, we're storing up massive problems for men and women, because women are using a lot of pornography as well. These are all challenges that society is facing now, driven by technology, and it's I guess the challenge for all of us is for each of us to be going out and influencing others and creating that movement to say, right, okay, how do we make the world a better place, and how do we make our own country a better place?
Fantastic. Fiona wanted to make a comment about the first question, but I think she probably wants to make some comments about positive ones about what Adrian was going on to talk about.
Yeah, just quickly, because it's something that I wasn't going to say, but I thought about it. So where it's taken the conversation slightly somewhere, maybe a little bit else, but I'm working on Project Soteria, which a lot of police colleagues will know about, and I was thinking about what you'd said, Adrian, about this idea that assuming consent when none is given is the problem. And we've got to also think, I guess, about courts, but also in police investigations. And one of the things that we've been finding in the way that some police are investigating rape crimes is that victims are being asked to prove to demonstrate what steps they took to show that they were not consenting. And that does set women up as starting from a point where consent is assumed unless you demonstrate not otherwise, where we know that the law actually should be him proving what steps he took to see she was consenting. And so I just thought when you were saying that, it's so embedded, this way of thinking, that even when we are trying to really help victims, we are so subjected to this idea that women are up for it, unless they demonstrate that they're not, that can actually even influence the questions that we're asking women when they're giving their VRI, ABE interviews. So I just thought that was really interesting. One of the other things, I guess now I've got the microphone, is the thing that I've seen across all of these campaigns is this idea about challenging acceptability at the heart. And that's something, so again, I was involved in a project in 2013 for the Office of the Children's Commissioner with young people about their understandings of sexual consent. And we found, sounds like exactly what you found, this was back in 2013, that young people knew what consent was, they just thought that in some circumstances it was acceptable to do something that they knew was rape. So they knew it was rape, but if it was in a relationship, it was acceptable. If they knew it was rape, but if she was easy, it was acceptable. And it sounds like, on a depressing note, I guess, that hasn't changed in 10 years. So it really sounds like that is the thing that we need to change, is challenging that acceptability. And that's what I see in all of these campaigns. And I guess the challenges that you've all managed in different ways is how you do that without evoking defensiveness at the same time as implicating all men, because like you said, all men are implicated. And we need to work out how to do that and how to have some of those uncomfortable conversations. It shouldn't be easy. Men should feel a bit uncomfortable about being implicated. I, as a white person, feel very uncomfortable when I'm implicated in the racist society that we have. I'm not racist, I do this. But to actually sit there and go, I am racist, I've been raised in a racist society, I'm a white person, there is no way that I haven't taken on board and acted out some of those messages. I think that that's the challenge. So maybe as a question there, how do we do that? Like, do you think that there's a way that we can have campaigns? Because I can remember I worked with Ben in the consultation, and it was very much the audience testing was that if we say too explicitly all men, you're complicit, that the defensiveness comes up. But do you think that there's a point that we are going to be able to have those conversations and the defensiveness is going to be able to come up, and we're going to say, sit with that, sit with feeling defensive and uncomfortable, and that's something that you're going to have to work through. Do you think that that's something, place that we could get to?
Sorry, I'm going to jump in, and I'll obviously give Sarah and Ben a chance to speak. I think that, you know, I agree with everything that you say, and for me, I think there's a couple of things going on there. One is, research shows that positive models of behaviour are really, really important, particularly for men. That we need to show what good looks like, and that's what we're going to try and do in the second campaign. We were kind of showing what bad looks like in the first campaign. We need to set up what the problem is, and then deliver the solution. So that's what we're working on just now. I think the second thing for me is that ultimately we need to have one-to-one conversations with men. And I don't think I can do that with comms, or I can't do it with the kind of comms that I mostly do, and I mostly get funding to do. What I want to do, and what I wanted to build into that first campaign, and it didn't really work apart from me literally sitting on my sofa at night talking to men on social, because I also run the social media team in Police Scotland, is we need to have those individual conversations with men and talk to them in a space that's safe, where we can challenge, you know, and we can be quite direct and say, you're talking crap when they're talking crap, but in a very, you know, kind of non-confrontatory way. And ultimately, I think that kind of street fighting, street to street, is probably where we'll see the greatest change quickest, which kind of goes back to your question around evaluation. You know, in terms of that's where my head is. It's totally intuitive, and it's based on professional experience previously in a completely different world. But we also need the bigger societal change to change the attitudes of film directors, to change the attitudes of journalists, so that a lot of this stuff becomes unacceptable without slipping into that slightly Handmaid's Tale kind of language orthodoxy, which language is really important, but it's not, you know, it's not the most important thing.
Thanks. Sarah, do you want to comment on any of that?
Similarly, the next stage of our campaign is going to look at having those conversations and providing a space for men and boys to sort of maybe say, I think this, how could, you know, ask for help if you like. So, you know, getting into detail now, but things like a chat bot may be something where they can say, either I felt this, or I've acted this way, or I've seen this, and, you know, is that okay? I don't think it is, but how do I change that? As well as showing through the campaign how to do that. And then it's just about education, and there's only so far that comms can go and campaigns can go. In Greater Manchester, our violence reduction unit is in numbers of schools through a violence prevention programme, and we have now started to get gender-based violence into that as well, starting with this video. And again, we will have a major sort of education programme over the next couple of years to start having those conversations as part of a bigger picture, just around how to treat each other at that really young age, you know, sort of 10, 11, 12. So, you know, it's just about having those conversations and how to find your way through relationships without being controlling. So that'll be a big part of that.
Thank you. Thanks. We're probably up to time with questions based on the fact that we will all want lunch. I think kind of what we're hearing is obviously that there's a lot more work to be done, and that kind of these 3 campaigns that we've heard about today have very much been about opening up that conversation and putting things on the table. And although there is a long way to go, I think it's still positive that it is now on the table as a direction for future campaigns. I think Adrian, you're right that it's about the campaign level, but it's also about getting more men and boys involved in the one-to-one conversations with their friends and embedding that. And we also know that part of that is about accepting that many of the men in this room might not have always lived a life where they have embodied those elements, but actually that's okay still to be strong enough to say, I acted this way in the past, and now I want to use that as a way of increasing change, and actually as a really well-placed person to have those conversations. I'm reminded about, plug upcoming, my book with Stephen Burrell, where it was about men's activism to end violence against women, and one of the men described himself actually as he felt like he was poacher turned gamekeeper in the kind of turnaround that he'd had in his life in terms of the violence and abuse and sexist attitudes that he used to have versus the kind of the role that he was then playing. So I'm not sure we exactly want more poachers come gamekeepers, but the idea of more men having individual one-to-one conversations and boys as well, to me is an excellent way forward. Yeah.
Can I just commend to anybody who's not heard it? There's a brilliant 30-minute piece on Radio 4 by a guy called Ali Heather, who's an influencer in Scotland that we worked with, called Am I That Guy? That does exactly that. And I had an hour-long conversation with Ali, and I kind of, again, have a family connection with him, but he absolutely takes that approach in terms of self-reflection, looking at his own behaviour, and then kind of taking it into interventions with his friends. It's really, really useful in terms of understanding the dynamic.
Yeah, and if we're recommending media, can we also recommend Stephen Burrell's Now and Men podcast, which covers a lot of the topics that have been talked about today as well. Brilliant. Okay, enjoy your lunch, everybody, and come back recharged in an hour. Thank you.